There's a storage unit on Airline Highway in Baton Rouge that my husband thought I'd never find. Unit number 47, climate-controlled, $63 a month. Inside, it was a cardboard box with enough paperwork to end 2 lives and save 1. Mine. But to explain how I ended up standing in that concrete hallway at 9 months pregnant, holding a receipt that smelled like motor oil and betrayal, I need to take you back to a Tuesday in September when a doctor told me I wasn't going through menopause. I was going through something else entirely. I was 49. Let me say that again, because my brain still trips over it every single time. 49 years old. I'd been a claims processor at Pelican State Insurance on Bluebonnet Boulevard in Baton Rouge for 9 years. The kind of job where you spend your days reading about other people's disasters and filling out forms that determine whether their disasters qualify for a check. I was good at it. Not great, not terrible, just good enough that nobody bothered me, which in an insurance office is the highest compliment you can receive. I drove a 2019 Toyota RAV4 that permanently smelled like chicory coffee because I spilled a full cup from community coffee on the passenger seat in March, and no amount of baking soda or prayer ever fully removed it. I had a decent salary, $39,000 a year, a 401k with about $112,500 in it, and a house on Magnolia Ridge Drive that we bought in June of 2013 for $249,000. The we in that sentence is important. We, as in me and my husband of 14 years, Beau Allen Fontenot. Beau was 54. A territory rep for a company called Delta Agricultural Equipment, which is a fancy way of saying he drove around South Louisiana, convincing farmers to buy expensive things that break down in humid weather. He drove a Ram 2500 that he washed every Sunday morning with the devotion of a man performing a religious sacrament. That truck was cleaner than our marriage, though I didn't know that yet. He wore a Carhartt cap to every restaurant, every grocery store, every family gathering because he thought it made him look rugged. It did not. It made him look like a 54-year-old man wearing a Carhartt cap. But I kept that opinion to myself for 14 years, which I think qualifies me for some kind of medal, or at least a plaque. Beau's other great love, besides the truck, was fishing. Every other Saturday, he'd drive out to False River, about 45 minutes west, and spend 6 hours on a bass boat that cost $32,000. I know the exact price because he told me at least once a month, the way some people tell you about their children's accomplishments. She's a $32,000 Tracker Pro team, he'd say, patting the trailer hitch like it was a golden retriever. I never corrected him on the pronoun. A man who names his boat and calls it she is not a man you argue with about grammar. Now the Tuesday in question, September the 10th. I'd been feeling dizzy at work for about 2 weeks. Not the dramatic hand on the forehead kind of dizzy. More like the world was tilting about 3 degrees to the left and nobody else seemed to notice. I figured it was the beginning of menopause. I was 49. Things were supposed to start shutting down, winding up, whatever the correct metaphor is for a body deciding it's done with certain departments. My doctor, Elaine Melancon, had an office on Perkins Road in a building that also housed a dentist and a CPA, which meant the waiting room always smelled like a combination of antiseptic and someone else's tax anxiety. I liked Dr. Melancon. She was the kind of doctor who looked at you like a person and not like a problem to be coded and billed. She ran some blood work, asked me the usual questions, and then she got quiet in a way that made the back of my neck prickle. She said it wasn't menopause. She said I was approximately 7 weeks pregnant. I sat on that exam table in a paper gown that made me look like a human tamale, and I stared at a poster on the wall about the stages of fetal development. Week 7 had an illustration that looked like a kidney bean with ambitions. That kidney bean was apparently inside me. Doing things. Growing ears, probably. I said, that's not possible. She said, I hear that a lot in this office, and yet here we are. I liked Dr. Melancon even more after that. She explained the risks. At 49, pregnancy is classified as high risk. The odds of chromosomal abnormalities are roughly 1 in 40. She said those words, 1 in 40, and they landed in my chest like a stone that had no intention of leaving. She referred me to a specialist for further testing. She told me to take prenatal vitamins. She told me to be careful. She did not tell me how to drive home with a brain that had just been completely reformatted. I Googled chromosomal abnormalities age 49 at a red light on Segan Lane and nearly rear-ended a UPS truck, which in retrospect was the universe trying to foreshadow something, but I was too busy reading statistics on a phone screen the size of a playing card to notice. 1 in 40. That number moved into my chest like a tenant who doesn't pay rent but refuses to leave. I carried it with me to the grocery store, to the gas station, to bed at night where it sat on my sternum and stared at the ceiling fan with me. 1 in 40. I stopped at Community Coffee on the way home. Not because I needed coffee. Pregnant women aren't supposed to have much caffeine, and I didn't even know the rules yet. I stopped because I needed to sit somewhere that wasn't a doctor's office and wasn't my house and wasn't my car that smelled like a 6-month-old coffee spill. I ordered a decaf chicory blend, and I sat at a corner table and I put my hand flat on my stomach over my shirt and I tried to feel something. I didn't feel anything. Not yet. She was too small. Just a kidney bean with ears. But she was there. I got home at 4:37. I know the exact time because I looked at the clock on the microwave when I walked in, the way you check the time when you know you're about to remember this moment for the rest of your life. Bo was sitting at the kitchen counter eating a bowl of gumbo, the instant kind from a pouch, not even homemade, not even the good instant kind. The one from the bottom shelf at Rouse's that tastes like someone described gumbo to a computer and the computer did its best. And I said it plain, the way you say things when your brain has run out of clever ways to package them. I'm pregnant. He didn't drop the spoon. That's the part I keep coming back to. You'd think a man hearing that his 49-year-old wife is pregnant would drop something. A spoon, a jaw, a glass, something. But Bo just stopped chewing. He sat there with a mouthful of instant gumbo from Rouse's, the cheap kind, staring at the spot where the countertop meets the backsplash like there was a secret message written in the grout. I counted. I've become a person who counts silence. I blame Bo for that. 12 seconds. 12 full seconds of nothing but the ceiling fan clicking overhead because it had been off balance since 2021 and neither of us ever fixed it. Then he swallowed, set the spoon down gently, which was somehow worse than dropping it, and said, "That's not possible." I told him I had a piece of paper from a medical doctor that said otherwise. I told him Dr. Melancon ran blood work, did an exam, and confirmed it. 7 weeks. High risk. 1 in 40. He looked at me. And I need to describe this look, because it matters. It wasn't anger. It wasn't surprise. It wasn't joy or fear or any of the things you'd expect from a man who just found out he's going to be a father after 14 years of marriage and 0 children. It was the look of a man doing math. Internal math. The kind of math that has nothing to do with chromosomes and everything to do with exit strategies. I didn't know that yet. I thought he was in shock. I thought he needed time. He picked up his keys from the counter, the ones with the bottle opener keychain he got at a Bass Pro Shops in Gonzales, walked out the front door, got in the Ram, and backed out of the driveway. He didn't say where he was going. He didn't say when he'd be back. He didn't say anything at all. He just left me standing in the kitchen with an overhead light that buzzed and a bowl of instant gumbo going cold on the counter. He didn't come back for 2 days. 2 days. 48 hours of silence, so thick you could chew it. I called him 11 times, went straight to voicemail after the 3rd call, which meant he'd turned the phone off. I texted 9 times. Nothing dramatic. Just, "Where are you?" Then, "Please call me." Then, "By Sunday morning, Bo, I need to know you're alive." That last one sounds calm on paper. I was not calm when I sent it. I was standing in the kitchen at 6:14 in the morning, in a bathrobe eating dry Cheerios out of the box because we were out of milk, and I hadn't gone to Rouse's because going to Rouse's meant leaving the house, and leaving the house meant admitting that life was continuing without his permission. He came back Sunday evening around 7. I heard the Ram pull into the driveway. That engine has a sound like a diesel heartbeat, and I hated how relieved I was to hear it. He didn't come inside right away. He sat on the back porch for about 40 minutes, looking out at the yard, which wasn't much of a yard. A rectangle of street, Augustine grass that went brown every August, and a magnolia tree that dropped leaves like it was getting paid by the leaf. When he finally came in, he smelled like fried catfish and the inside of someone else's house, though I didn't have the bandwidth to unpack that detail at the time. He stood in the kitchen doorway, Carhartt cap still on, and said 5 words. "I'm not doing this." Not "I'm scared." Not "let's talk about this." Not "what do we do?" Just a decision delivered like a weather report, partly cloudy with a chance of abandonment. I asked him what exactly he wasn't doing. He said he wasn't doing any of it. The baby, the risk, the cost, the appointments, the sleepless nights at his age. He said he was 54 years old and he'd made it this far without a child, and he wasn't about to start now with odds like these. He said odds like these like he was talking about a poker hand and not a human being. Then he went to the garage. He'd set up a cot out there the previous summer when he was working on the truck's transmission, and that cot became his bed. Just like that. No discussion, no argument, no negotiation. He moved to the garage the way some men move to another state. Quietly, completely, and with no forwarding address. Over the next 9 days, Beau went from silent to hostile in a progression so smooth you almost didn't notice it happening, like a pot on low heat that nobody's watching. First, it was the avoidance, leaving for work before I woke up, coming home after I was in bed, eating dinner in the Ram in the driveway, and yes, I watched him through the kitchen window doing it, sitting in that truck with a Popeyes bag on the dashboard and the cab light on, scrolling his phone like a man who'd already left but hadn't figured out the paperwork yet. Then came the comments, little ones at first, dropped like coins on a counter. How much a baby costs in the first year. How our insurance didn't cover half of what I probably thought it did. How his buddy Terrence had a kid at 46 and said it nearly killed his marriage. Terrence, the same Terrence who built a fence last summer that leaned so far to the right it looked like it was making a political statement. I was supposed to take life advice filtered through Terrence. Then, one evening in late September, Beau started quoting statistics. He was standing at the counter microwaving a frozen crawfish pie, the kind from the gas station on Coursey Boulevard that no reasonable person should eat more than once a year, and he started telling me about chromosomal risks at my age. Down syndrome odds. Trisomy 18. He'd been Googling. He said the numbers like they were verdicts, like the baby had already been tried and convicted of something she hadn't even done yet. I said, I know the numbers, Beau. He said, I don't think you do. I said, this man eats gas station crawfish pie 3 times a week, but suddenly he's an expert on health risks. He didn't laugh. I thought it was funny. It was extremely funny. It's still funny. If you can't laugh at a man who eats gas station shellfish lecturing you about medical statistics, then I don't know what kind of comedy you're waiting for. He didn't say the word yet, the word that ended us. That came later, but I could feel it building the way you can feel a thunderstorm rolling in off the Gulf. Before the first drop falls, the air changes. It gets heavy. You can taste the metal in it. And on a Tuesday night, in early October, while a frozen crawfish pie rotated slowly in the microwave like a sad little carousel, he said something I need you to hear exactly the way he said it, because the words matter. And once you hear them, you'll understand why the next 8 months happened the way they did. He said he didn't want to spend the next 20 years paying for a problem. That's the word he used. Problem. Not child, not baby, not even it. Problem. Like our daughter was a leaky pipe or a code violation, or one of those claims I process at Pelican State where someone's roof caved in, and now everyone's arguing about who's responsible. He said it while the microwave beeped behind him and the crawfish pie sat there steaming on the counter, and I stood on the other side of the kitchen island and felt something close inside me, like a door being locked from the inside. I didn't cry. I want you to know that. I didn't cry that night. The crying came later, in bulk, like a Costco shipment of grief. But that night I just stood there and looked at this man I'd been married to for 14 years, and I thought, I don't know who you are, not in the dramatic movie way, in the real way. The way you realize the person sitting across from you at breakfast every morning for over a decade has been a stranger the whole time, and you just never ask the right questions. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Because before the papers came, before the sticky note, before the thing he said that actually ended us, I need to tell you about my friend. Her name was Tamika Renee Boudreau. And right now, you need to pay attention to her, because everything that happens from here on out has her fingerprints on it, even the parts where you can't see her hands. We'd been close for 9 years. She worked as an assistant manager at Bayou Federal Credit Union, the branch on Sherwood Forest Boulevard if you want the full picture. She was 42, divorced, raising a 16-year-old son named Jalen, who played wide receiver on his high school football team and had never once in his life remembered to take off his cleats before walking across the kitchen floor. Tamika talked about those scuff marks the way other mothers talk about war wounds. With exasperation, yes, but underneath it, a pride so deep it had roots. Tamika had been through her own divorce 3 years earlier. A bad one. Her ex, a man whose name she refused to say out loud and instead referred to as that situation in Houston, had moved to Texas and stopped paying child support after 5 months. She knew what it felt like to be left standing in a kitchen with paperwork and silence. At least that's what I believed. She made the best crawfish étouffée in East Baton Rouge Parish. I don't say that lightly. I've lived in Louisiana my entire life. I've had étouffée at every church fair, every family reunion, every potluck where someone's aunt brings a dish and dares you to criticize it. Tamika's was different. She used a dark roux that took 45 minutes of constant stirring, and she added a pinch of cayenne at the very end that hit you about 3 seconds after the first bite, like a polite slap from someone who loves you. Her étouffée could make you forgive things. That was the problem. It made you forgive things you shouldn't. When I told her about the pregnancy, she grabbed both my hands across her kitchen table so hard I felt my knuckles pop. Her eyes filled up. She said, "This is a blessing, Chur. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Not Bo, not your mommin, not anyone." And when Bo refused to drive me to my first real OBGYN appointment 3 days later, said he had a client meeting in Gonzales he couldn't move, Tamika picked me up in her Nissan Rogue at 7:45 in the morning. She had 2 chicory coffees from the drive-thru on Corsi and a paper bag of beignets from that little bakery on Choctaw Drive, the one run by the Vietnamese family that somehow makes the best French donuts in Baton Rouge, which, if you think about it, is the most Louisiana sentence ever spoken. She sat in the waiting room at Dr. Melancon's office for an hour and 40 minutes, reading a copy of People magazine so old that the cover story was about a celebrity divorce that had already been followed by a remarriage and a second divorce. She didn't complain. She didn't check her watch. She didn't sigh or scroll her phone with the restless energy of someone counting the minutes. She just sat there like a woman who had nowhere else to be, which, looking back, was either the kindest thing a friend could do or the most calculated. I know which one it was now. I didn't know then. I remember sitting in that exam room in one of those paper gowns that make every woman in America feel like a human Boudin link, and I thought something that I need you to hold on to. I thought, whatever happens with Bo, whatever happens with the numbers, whatever happens with any of it, at least I have Tamika. She's the one person who showed up. At least I have Tamika. I want you to seal that thought in your memory, like leftover étouffée you're saving for tomorrow. Put it in the container with the blue lid, the one that actually seals, not the one where the lid is warped and everything leaks. Seal it tight, because you're going to need it later, and when you open it again, it's going to taste completely different. After the appointment, she drove me home. She carried the bag of leftover beignets inside, even though they were cold and stale by then, because Tamika was the kind of woman who didn't waste food. She asked me how I was feeling. She asked if Dr. Melancon had said anything about the risks. She asked what Bo's reaction had been when I told him the appointment went fine. I told her Bo hadn't asked about the appointment at all. She shook her head slowly, the way you do when something confirms what you already suspected, and she said, "You deserve better than that, Chur. You know that, right?" I believed her. Why wouldn't I? She'd driven 40 minutes round trip to sit in a waiting room and read about celebrity divorces from 2 years ago. She'd brought beignets. She'd said, blessing with tears in her eyes, this was my person. My ride or die. My emergency contact, both on my phone and in my heart. She also asked me, and I need you to notice how naturally this came up, whether Bo had said anything about the finances, about the joint accounts, about how things would work if he kept acting the way he was acting. She said she was asking because she'd been through it, and the money part is always the part that catches you off guard. I told her I hadn't even thought about the money yet. I was still processing the fact that I was pregnant and my husband wouldn't look at me. She nodded. It was just a nod, quick, small, like a period at the end of a sentence. But I think about that nod now. I think about it more than I think about almost anything else from that day. Because that nod was the moment she filed away the information she needed, that I hadn't looked at the accounts yet, that I wasn't watching the money, that the door was wide open, and I didn't even know there was a door. Thursday, October the 3rd. I know the date because it's printed on the top of the first page of the paperwork that ended my marriage, and once you've read a date on a divorce filing, it tattoos itself onto your brain like a serial number on a piece of evidence. I came home from work at 5:22. The Ram was in the driveway, which was unusual for a Thursday because Bo usually had client dinners on Thursdays, or at least that's what he told me. I walked in through the side door, the one that opened into the kitchen, and I saw two things at once. The first was a manila envelope on the kitchen counter, sitting next to the fruit bowl that hadn't had fruit in it since August because I'd given up restocking it after the bananas kept going brown and nobody ate them. The second was Bo, sitting in the living room with the television off. Now, I need you to understand something about Bo Allen Fontenot and television. This man did not sit in rooms where the television was off. He would turn on bass fishing reruns from 2019 rather than sit in silence. He would watch the Weather Channel track a pressure system moving across Manitoba, a place he could not find on a map if his life depended on it, rather than exist in a room without noise. Bo with the TV off was like a smoke detector without batteries. Something was wrong, and the silence was the alarm. Inside the manila envelope were divorce papers he'd already filed. Clipped to the front page was a yellow sticky note in his handwriting, which was somewhere between a doctor's prescription and a ransom letter, and it said, "This is the right thing for both of us." The right thing, for both of us, as if he'd done a survey and we'd both agreed. As if abandoning your pregnant wife was a mutual decision that simply hadn't been formally announced yet. The audacity of that sticky note still takes my breath away. The man couldn't be bothered to write a full paragraph. He gave me the same emotional effort he'd give a note on the refrigerator about needing more milk. I stood in that kitchen for a long time. The overhead light was buzzing. It had been buzzing for 2 years. One of those things I kept meaning to call an electrician about and never did, because there was always something more urgent, like the water heater that groaned every morning, or the back porch step that was soft in the middle. The house on Magnolia Ridge Drive was a $249,000 collection of things that needed fixing, and now the marriage was one of them, except this one came with a sticky note instead of an estimate. I held those papers, and I thought about the instant gumbo, the 12 seconds of silence, the 2 days he disappeared, the garage cot, the gas station crawfish pie spinning in the microwave. I thought about all the moments over the past 3 weeks that had been building toward this envelope and how I'd watched every single one of them happen and still somehow didn't see it coming. That's the thing about slow disasters. You notice the water rising and you think, it'll stop. And then it doesn't, and then you're standing in your kitchen holding a manila envelope and the water is at your chin. That's when he walked in. He stood in the doorway between the living room and the kitchen, and he said the thing that ended us, not the marriage. A piece of paper can end a marriage. Courts do it every day. What he said ended the 14 years of whatever we'd been pretending to be. It ended the version of him that I'd been carrying in my head, the reliable one, the one I compared to a refrigerator, steady and cold but functional. That version died in the doorway, with his Carhartt cap on and his hands in his pockets like he was waiting for a bus. He said, "I'm not raising something broken. I want the house, the boat, and we're done. You can figure out the rest." Something broken. Not a baby with challenges. Not a child who might need extra care. Something broken. Like she was a lawnmower with a cracked blade. Like she was a product he was returning because it didn't meet specifications. This man who ate gas station crawfish pie and washed his truck like it was a racehorse and spent $32,000 on a bass boat he used twice a month was standing in my kitchen telling me that our daughter, our child, the kidney bean with ears who was at that moment growing fingernails inside me, was something broken. I don't know what I expected. Maybe an argument. Maybe a conversation. Maybe one of those long, painful, honest talks that married people are supposed to have when life throws a grenade into the living room. But this wasn't a conversation. This was a verdict delivered by a man who had clearly been rehearsing it, probably in the Ram, on his way to those client dinners that I was beginning to suspect were not entirely client dinners. He'd set it to the windshield until it sounded right, until the words lost their sharp edges in his mouth. By the time they reached me, they were smooth and practiced and absolutely devastating. I told him the baby might be perfectly healthy. I told him 1 in 40 means 39 in 40 are fine. He said he wasn't rolling the dice. This man who played poker every other Friday with Terrence and 2 guys from his office, who once bet $300 on an LSU game because he had a feeling, who ate gas station shellfish on a regular basis, with the casual confidence of a man who'd never read a health inspection report. This man was not a gambler when it came to his own child, only when it came to everything else. I would have laughed if I could have remembered how. I stood there in that kitchen with the buzzing light and the empty fruit bowl and the divorce papers and the sticky note, and I felt something drain out of me. Not hope exactly. More like the energy it takes to keep pretending that things are going to be okay. That energy left me the way air leaves a tire, slowly and then all at once, until I was standing on the rim. I called Tamika. She was at my house in 35 minutes. She had a Tupperware of étouffée in one hand and a box of tissues in the other, and she walked through my front door like a woman who'd been waiting for this call. Looking back, maybe she had been. She sat with me on the couch for 3 hours. She held my hand. She let me cry into a throw pillow that still smelled like Bose cologne and diesel fuel, that combination of department store musk and engine that had been the background scent of my marriage for 14 years. And when I was finally cried out, when there was nothing left but that hollow, scraped clean feeling you get after a really good cry, the kind where your ribs ache and your eyes feel like they've been sandpapered, she got practical. She told me I needed a lawyer. She said she knew someone, a family law attorney named Reggie Landry. Small practice, reasonable rates. He'd handled a friend's custody case the year before, and Tamika said the woman got everything. She said it like that, got everything, with the kind of emphasis that made it sound like a promise. She pulled out her phone right there on my couch, the one that still smelled like Bose cologne and my tears and the faint ghost of étouffée from the Tupperware on the coffee table, and she texted me his number. I didn't question it. Why would I? My best friend was sitting next to me at 10:30 at night, handing me a tissue with one hand and a lifeline with the other. You don't interrogate a lifeline. You grab it. Then she asked me something else. And this part I need you to pay attention to, because at the time it sounded like the most natural question in the world. She asked what the bank had said when I called about the joint accounts. I told her I hadn't called yet. I said I'd barely had time to process the divorce papers, let alone start thinking about bank accounts. I was 8 weeks pregnant. My husband had just called our baby something broken, and the most productive thing I'd done in the last 4 hours was cry into a pillow and eat étouffée straight from a Tupperware with a serving spoon because I couldn't find a clean fork. She nodded, that same nod from the week before. Quick, small, a period at the end of a sentence she was writing in her head. And then she offered to come over that weekend and help me organize all my financial documents. Bank statements, tax returns, the mortgage paperwork, the car titles, everything the lawyer would need, she said. So Reggie could hit the ground running, so I'd be prepared. I said yes. Of course I said yes. That's what you say when your best friend offers to help you sort through the wreckage of your life while you're sitting on a couch that smells like the man who wrecked it. You say yes, and you feel grateful, and you don't ask why she seems so interested in your bank statements, because why would she be? She's your friend, she's been through this, she knows the drill. She came over that Saturday with a filing folder system from Office Depot and 2 large coffees, and she sat at my kitchen table for 4 hours going through every piece of financial paper I owned. She was organized. Methodical. She made neat little piles. She asked about accounts I'd forgotten existed, a savings bond from 2016, a small CD that had matured the previous year. She wrote everything down in a notebook, with a blue pen and neat handwriting that looked like it belonged in a credit union, because it did. She wasn't helping me get organized. She was doing an inventory. She was making sure she knew exactly what I had access to and exactly what I didn't. She was checking every drawer for the one piece of paper that might lead me to a joint account at Bayou Federal Credit Union with her name and my husband's name on it. And when she didn't find it, she put the cap back on her blue pen and smiled and said I was in better shape than I thought. But I didn't know any of that yet. I just knew my kitchen table was finally organized, and my friend had given up her Saturday to help me, and that felt like love. It felt like the definition of love. Someone spending their weekend sorting through your tax returns with a filing system and a blue pen. I retained Reggie Landry in early November, $4,500 retainer. I wrote the check at his desk and watched him fold it and slide it into a drawer like a man who'd done this exact motion 10,000 times. His office was on the second floor of a converted shotgun house on Main Street in Baton Rouge. The kind of building where the stairs creak and the air conditioning sounds like an asthmatic cat trying to breathe through a straw. He had a fish tank in the corner, one fish. One sad, gray little guppy swimming in slow circles in a tank that needed cleaning about 3 weeks ago. The gravel at the bottom had a film of green on it. The plastic plant was tilted sideways like it had given up. That fish had nothing to do with my divorce, but I think about it more than I should. Something about watching a single creature swim in endless circles in a dirty tank while a man in a short-sleeved dress shirt told me everything was going to be fine. It felt symbolic. I just didn't know of what yet. Reggie was pleasant. That's the most accurate word. Not sharp, not aggressive, not the kind of lawyer who makes the other side nervous. He was pleasant the way a dentist's waiting room is pleasant. You don't hate it, but you don't feel any better when you leave. He shook my hand, offered me water from a mini fridge that hummed louder than the fish tank, and said he'd get right on this. And look, Reggie wasn't a bad lawyer the way a leaky faucet isn't a bad faucet. It still produces water. It just doesn't do it efficiently, and eventually the drip drives you insane. He filed a discovery request for Beau's financial records in early December. Standard procedure. Show me your bank statements, tax returns, pay stubs. Beau's attorney, a man named Garrett Hebert with a firm on Acadian Thruway, provided the bare minimum: 2 months of checking account statements, a single-page summary of assets. Nothing from the joint savings, nothing from the credit cards, nothing from the brokerage or the retirement accounts or any of the places where real money hides when someone doesn't want you to find it. I told Reggie this didn't seem like enough. I told him that the joint savings account at Coastal Commerce Bank had $52,800 in it back in August. I knew because I'd checked the balance when I was thinking about replacing the water heater, $52,800. The statements Garrett sent over showed a balance of $4,100. That's $48,700 gone in 3 months. $48,700 doesn't just evaporate. You can't leave $48,700 in a cab or lose it between the couch cushions. That money went somewhere, and I wanted to know where. I asked Reggie to subpoena the full bank records. He leaned back in his chair, which squeaked in a way that suggested it had been squeaking for years, and nobody cared, and he told me it wasn't worth antagonizing the judge at this stage. He said these things have a way of working themselves out in mediation. He said mediation the way a mechanic says it should be fine, right before your transmission falls out on Interstate 10. I sat in that office with the dying guppy and the humming mini fridge and the squeaking chair, and I thought, this man is not going to find my money. But I didn't know what else to do. I'd already written the check. The guppy swam another circle. That fish never did find its way out of that tank. Neither did Reggie Landry. Meanwhile, at Pelican State Insurance, someone was rearranging the furniture while I was still sitting in it. My supervisor, a man named Marcus, who communicated primarily through passive-aggressive emails and calendar invites with titles like Quick Sync that were never quick and never synced anything, had started reassigning my complex cases. Claims I'd been working for months. A commercial property dispute involving a warehouse on Choctaw Drive that had flooded twice in 18 months. A subrogation case with a trucking company out of Gonzales, where the liability chain was so tangled it looked like a plate of spaghetti someone had dropped on a legal textbook. Cases I knew inside and out, cases I'd spent nights reading through because I actually cared about getting the details right. Suddenly they had new lead adjusters. When I asked Marcus about it, he leaned against the break room doorframe with a coffee mug that said "World's Okayest Boss," which was the most honest thing in that entire building, and he said they were just balancing the workload. You've got a lot going on right now, Celeste. We want to make sure nothing falls through the cracks. Nothing falls through the cracks. That's corporate for. We're pushing you toward the cracks so we can watch you fall through it. But the part that really got me was what I heard through the thin wall of the break room 2 days later, while I was heating up leftover red beans and rice in the microwave. Marcus was in a meeting with 2 other managers, and the words coverage planning floated through the wall clear as a church bell on Sunday morning. Coverage planning. If you've never worked in insurance, let me translate. Coverage planning means we're figuring out how to do your job without you, and we'd like to have that figured out before you become inconvenient. I was 4 months pregnant, getting divorced, watching my savings vanish into an account I didn't know existed, paying a lawyer who couldn't find water if he fell out of a boat, and now my employer was measuring my desk for the next person. I wanted to walk into Marcus's office and tell him exactly what I thought about his coverage planning, but I didn't, because pregnant women who make scenes at work don't get severance packages. They get calendar invites titled Performance Conversation. At home, Beau's demands had solidified like cement left out in the Louisiana heat. Through Garrett Hebert, he wanted the house, all of it. Full equity, which at that point was roughly $198,000. He wanted the Ram. He wanted the base boat, the $32,000 Tracker Pro team that he loved more than he'd ever loved a human being, including me, including the baby, including himself, though he didn't have the self-awareness to know that last part. He wanted the riding mower. He wanted 60% of whatever was left in the joint accounts, which was already shrinking in ways I didn't yet understand. And he wanted me to assume the remaining $1,800 balance on a Lowe's credit card for a fence he'd built the previous summer. A fence. Let me tell you about this fence. Beau built it because his buddy Terrence had built a fence, and Beau could not stand being the only man on his block without a fence. Never mind that our backyard faced a drainage ditch and a row of crepe myrtles that provided perfectly adequate privacy. Terrence had a fence, so Beau needed a fence. He used the wrong wood because Terrence recommended it, and Terrence's expertise in fencing was roughly equal to his expertise in giving life advice, which is to say non-existent. The fence warped after the first hard rain. It leaned. It developed a gap near the gate that was wide enough for the neighbor's cat to walk through, and that cat took full advantage, leaving gifts in our flower bed that I will not describe in detail. And now Beau wanted me to pay for it. The fence that I never wanted, built with advice from a man whose own fence looked like it was attempting to flee the premises. $1,800 for a monument to male ego and bad lumber choices. He'd also canceled my access to the shared credit card. Just called the bank and had them remove my name, which I discovered at the Shell station on Plank Road when my card was declined in front of a line of 3 people, one of whom was a woman from my church who gave me a look that could have curdled milk. I paid with cash I had in my purse, $7.12, barely enough for half a tank. And I sat in the RAV4 in the Shell station parking lot, and I stared at the gas gauge, and I did math. Math I didn't want to do. Math that tasted like copper in my mouth. He changed the streaming password too. Not that it mattered. I'd been watching the same cooking competition on repeat for weeks, the one where people make elaborate desserts under time pressure, which felt like a metaphor for my entire life, except I didn't get to lick the bowl at the end. But suddenly I was locked out. I had to create my own account, $7.99 a month for the basic plan because I refused to pay more on principle. The picture quality was terrible. I watched an entire season of a British baking show where everyone looked slightly blurry, like I was watching it through the bottom of a glass of sweet tea. It felt metaphorically appropriate. At night, I'd lie on my side. You can't sleep on your back after a certain point in pregnancy. Something about blood flow, and I'd do the math on the ceiling. Mortgage, $12.67 a month. Car insurance, $153. Groceries, $3.10 if I was careful, if I stuck to rice and beans and whatever was on sale at Rouse's, if I stopped buying the good coffee and switched to the store brand that tasted like hot brown disappointment. Health insurance premiums going up by $3.60 a month after delivery. And somewhere out there, $48,700 of my money was sitting in an account I didn't know about, earning interest I'd never see. Growing in the dark like mushrooms. But I didn't know that yet. The ceiling didn't tell me. The ceiling just stared back and let me do the math wrong. I told Tamika about the discovery problem over coffee at her kitchen table. She listened. She stirred her coffee slowly, the spoon making lazy circles, which looking back is exactly what Reggie was doing with my case. Slow circles, going nowhere. She said maybe Reggie knew what he was doing. He'd been at this a long time. Sometimes you have to trust the process, Chur. I trusted the process. The process was a guppy swimming in circles in a tank that nobody ever cleaned, but I trusted it because the woman I trusted most in the world told me to, and she had her reasons for telling me to trust a process that was designed to fail. I just didn't know those reasons yet. They were sitting in a storage unit on Airline Highway, in a cardboard box, in the dark, earning interest like everything else I couldn't see. My mother called on a Thursday evening in December. I was standing at the stove making scrambled eggs because scrambled eggs were about the only thing that didn't make me nauseous anymore. Everything else, the smell of garlic, the sight of raw chicken, the mere concept of shrimp, sent my stomach into a revolt that felt less like morning sickness and more like my body staging a political protest against the entire culinary tradition of South Louisiana. Scrambled eggs were neutral territory, Switzerland on a plate. I knew it was her before I picked up because she had a special ringtone. I'd set it to a Cajun accordion riff 2 years ago as a joke, and then I never changed it because every time it played, it reminded me of her kitchen in Breaux Bridge, which smelled like coffee and old wood and whatever she'd been cooking that morning, even if what she'd been cooking was terrible. Odette Thibodeau, 78 years old, retired French teacher who'd spent 31 years teaching 7th graders in Street Martin Parish how to conjugate verbs they would never use in conversation. She lived in Breaux Bridge, about an hour west of Baton Rouge, in a house on Ree Street that had been in the family since 1968, close enough to have strong opinions about my life, far enough to deliver them by telephone, which she preferred because it allowed her to hang up dramatically when she'd made her point. She said, "My name, just my name, Celeste. No chair, no bebe, no softening. When Odette Thibodeau calls you by your government name with no Cajun French cushion around it, you are not being called. You are being summoned." She'd heard from Beau's sister, Darlene, who'd heard from Beau's mother, who'd heard from Beau, which meant the news had traveled through the Fontenot family grapevine at the speed of gossip, which in Louisiana is faster than light and twice as destructive. I was the last to know it was public. My own pregnancy, my own divorce, making the rounds at family dinners I wasn't invited to anymore. She told me she loved me. She always led with that when she was about to say something that would leave a mark. It was her version of anesthesia. I love you, but there's always a but. The but is where the surgery happens. Tu n'as pas 25, pas même 35. You're not 25, not even 35. She said it in that half-English, half-Cajun French way she slipped into when she was emotional, the language of her mother and her grandmother and every woman in our family who'd ever had to say hard things to their daughters across a kitchen table or through a telephone line. I told her I knew how old I was. She said she wasn't sure I did, because if I really understood what 49 meant, I'd be thinking about this differently. She said she'd buried my pair at 63. Heart attack on a Tuesday morning in November 2014. He'd been drinking his coffee, community coffee with chicory, the same kind I spilled in my RAV4, and he put his hand on his chest and was gone before the mug hit the floor. 63 years old. The mug didn't even break. It just rolled under the table and sat there while my mother's world ended above it. I buried your pair at 63, she said. Tu veux this baby burying you at 10? That one landed. I'm not going to pretend it didn't. That one went through me like a cold wind through a screen door on the bayou, the kind of wind that comes off the Atchafalaya in January when the air is so wet it feels like the sky is leaning on you. I stood at the stove holding a spatula over a pan of eggs that were starting to burn, and I didn't move. I couldn't move because she'd taken the one thing I was most afraid of, the thing I whispered to the ceiling at 3 a.m. when the math wouldn't stop, and she'd said it out loud in plain language with no cushion and no mercy. What if I die and leave this child alone? The eggs burned. Not a little. A lot. The kitchen filled with that acrid yellow smell of overcooked eggs, the smell of a meal that nobody was going to eat, ruined because I was standing still in the middle of a sentence my mother had dropped on me like an anvil wrapped in love. She didn't expect an answer. Odette Thibodeau was not a woman who asked questions she wanted answered. She asked questions she wanted you to carry. She wanted you to pick them up and hold them and feel the weight of them in your chest until you understood what she understood. She said, "Think about what you're doing, Celeste." And then she hung up. That was it. No goodbye. No, I'll call you tomorrow. No softening. Just the click and then the silence and then the accordion ringtone was gone, and I was standing in a kitchen that smelled like burned eggs and regret. I didn't call her back. I didn't call anyone. I stood at the stove for a while, looking at the pan. Then I scraped the eggs into the trash and put the pan in the sink and sat down at the kitchen table. The kitchen table in the house on Magnolia Ridge Drive that my husband was going to take from me. 8 weeks pregnant with a baby that my husband called something broken and my mother thought might bury me. And the only person who seemed to want this child, who seemed to believe she was worth the risk, was me. Just me. Sitting at a table in a house I was losing, with burned eggs in the... I opened the junk drawer. I don't know why. Maybe because it was the one thing in that house I could control. The world was falling apart, but the junk drawer could be fixed. I took everything out. Batteries, I sorted them by size. AAA in one row. AA in another. The big square 9-volt that had been rolling around loose for 2 years, its contacts touching a paperclip, which was probably a fire hazard I'd been ignoring since the Biden administration. 11 expired coupons for places that didn't even exist anymore. A menu from Faux Cajun on Perkins Road that closed in 2022. I'd liked that place. They made a pho with andouille sausage that was either a crime against Vietnamese cuisine or a masterpiece of Louisiana fusion, depending on who you asked. I threw the menu away. I threw away the coupons. I put the batteries back in neat rows. I found a rubber band and put it around the paper clips. I closed the drawer. My hands wouldn't stop moving. That's what I did when the world got too big and too heavy and too loud. I made something small and orderly. Batteries by size, coupons by date, paper clips in a rubber band. As if organizing a junk drawer could organize the wreckage of a life that was coming apart at every joint and seam. It couldn't, but it kept my hands busy while the rest of me sat at that table and tried to remember how to breathe. The eggs were in the trash, the drawer was clean. And somewhere in Brobridge, my mother was sitting in her kitchen with a cup of terrible coffee, thinking about a mug that rolled under a table on a Tuesday morning and never got picked up. The amniocentesis was on a Monday in mid-December. If you've never had one, I want you to imagine lying on your back on a table covered in paper that crinkles every time you breathe, while a doctor inserts a needle into your belly and extracts fluid from the sac that's keeping your baby alive. You watch it on a screen, the needle going in, the fluid coming out, your baby, right there, floating in the gray static of an ultrasound image, completely unaware that someone just poked a hole in her living room. I gripped the side of the exam table hard enough to leave fingernail marks in the vinyl. Dr. Melancon talked me through it. She was calm. She was always calm. The kind of calm that comes from having done this 1,000 times and knowing that the person on the table needs your voice more than they need your explanation. She told me I'd feel pressure. She was right. She told me it would be quick. She was also right. She told me results would take about 2 weeks, standard processing time, maybe a little longer, because of the holidays. 2 weeks, 14 days, 336 hours. I did not need to do that math, but my brain did it anyway, automatically, the way it had been doing math on the ceiling every night since October. 2 weeks came and went, then a third week started, and nobody called. I phoned the office on a Tuesday. The receptionist, a woman who had the bedside manner of a toll booth operator on Interstate 10, told me the lab was backed up due to holiday staffing, and they'd call as soon as they had the results. She said it the way you tell someone their pizza was delayed. It'll be there when it's there. Except this wasn't a pizza. This was a number. 1 in 40. And until someone told me which side of that number my daughter was on, I couldn't breathe all the way. Every breath stopped at about 80%, like there was a cap on my lungs that wouldn't come off until the phone rang. 3 weeks of not knowing. 3 weeks of lying awake at 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling fan that still clicked because nobody fixed it. 1 in 40. 1 in 40. 1 in 40. The number had its own heartbeat. It pulsed in my chest while I drove to work. It sat next to me at my desk while Marcus reassigned another one of my cases. It climbed into bed with me at night and pressed its face against my sternum and whispered statistics until the alarm went off. During those 3 weeks, everything else kept happening. Because life doesn't pause for your crisis. That's one of those things nobody warns you about. The world keeps spinning at the exact same speed no matter how badly you need it to slow down. Bills still come. The mortgage still hits on the 1st. The water heater still groans at 6 in the morning like an old man getting out of a chair. And your husband's lawyer still sends paperwork. Bo had gotten bolder. Garrett Hebert sent over a revised settlement proposal. On top of everything he'd already demanded, he now wanted the riding mower, a John Deere that cost $2,400, and that I'd technically paid for with my Christmas bonus in 2022, and he wanted me to assume the full $1,800 balance on the Lowe's card for the fence that leaned, the fence that Terrence inspired. The fence that had a gap wide enough for the neighbor's cat to conduct its nightly business in my flower bed. Bo wanted me to pay for that fence while he took the house it was attached to. His generosity knew no bounds. In exchange for all of this, he would magnanimously waive any claim to my 401k, which had $112,500 in it. He presented this like he was doing me a favor, like a man handing you a glass of water after setting your house on fire. And then, on a Wednesday night, I broke. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a scream or a thrown plate or a door slammed so hard the frame cracks. It was a cooking competition rerun. I was watching Chopped, an episode I'd seen before, where a pastry chef tried to make a 3-layer cake in 30 minutes, and the whole thing collapsed on the plate. Just folded in on itself like a building being demolished from the inside. The frosting slid, the layers buckled, and this woman, this chef who'd been holding it together for 3 rounds, stood there and watched her work fall apart on national television. And I felt a kinship with that cake so deep and so spiritual that I started crying and could not stop. I cried for the cake. I cried for the chef. I cried for the baby I didn't know was healthy. I cried for the house I was losing and the money that was gone, and the husband who called our daughter something broken, and the mother who asked if she'd bury me at 10, and the Guppy and Reggie Landry's fish tank that was never sown. Getting out. I cried until my ribs hurt and my face was swollen and the credits had rolled and another episode had started, and someone was trying to make an appetizer out of gummy bears and duck liver, and I was still crying. I didn't go to work Thursday. I didn't go to work Friday. I called in sick, which at Pelican State means filling out an electronic form and waiting for Marcus to send you a calendar invite titled Wellness Check-In, which is just a passive-aggressive reminder that you're burning through your PTO like a woman who's falling apart, which I was. I turned off my phone. I lay on the couch in a bathrobe that was older than most of my friendships, a faded blue terry cloth robe I'd bought at a TJ Maxx in 2017 that had survived more emotional crises than any garment should be asked to. I watched Chopped for 14 hours straight, not because I was interested, because the sound of people cooking under pressure was oddly comforting when you were a woman under pressure who couldn't cook anything without burning it. At 1 a.m, I ate an entire box of Zatarain's dirty rice mix, just made the whole thing on the stove, stood there, stirring it in my bathrobe like a witch, tending a cauldron of sadness, and ate it out of the pot with a wooden spoon. No plate. No bowl, no pretense. Just a pregnant woman in a bathrobe eating boxed rice mix directly from the cookware at 1 a.m, while Guy Fieri judged someone's pork chop on the television in the other room. I called it dinner. Technically, it was 3 meals I'd skipped combined. Not my finest moment, not my worst either, which tells you something about the kind of year I was having. On Friday afternoon, there was a knock on the door. Tamika. She didn't call first. She just showed up the way she always did, like a woman who had a sixth sense for when I was at the bottom. She had a Tupperware of étouffée in one hand, the good kind, the dark roux kind with the cayenne kick at the end, and an envelope of cash in the other. $350. Don't argue with me, Chur, she said. I know your card got declined at the Shell station on Tuesday because you texted me from the pump like it was a crime scene. Take this. Pay me back whenever. Or don't. She sat with me on the couch. She rubbed my back in slow circles while I cried, and I remember thinking that her hand moved the same way Reggie's spoon moved in his coffee. Slow, circular, going nowhere. But it felt like comfort at the time. It felt like the only warm thing in a house that had gone cold in every way a house can go cold. She told me I was going to get through this. She told me I was the strongest woman she knew. She told me that she'd been exactly where I was 3 years ago, sitting on a couch in a bathrobe with a man's ghost all over the furniture, and she'd made it out the other side. You will too, Chur. I promise you. And then, very casually, like it was a thought that had just occurred to her, like it wasn't the whole reason she'd driven over here with a Tupperware and $350 in cash, she said she'd been thinking. Maybe I should let him have the house. She said it gently, the way you suggest a restaurant to someone. Have you tried that new place on Government Street? Except, instead of a restaurant, she was suggesting, I hand over $198,000 in equity to the man who'd called our daughter something broken, and she said it while rubbing my back with the same hand that had been signing joint account statements with his name next to hers for 16 months. Start fresh, she said. That's what I did when my ex left. Best decision I ever made. The house is just walls and a bad roof, Chur. You and the baby, that's what matters. Let him choke on the mortgage. And I, 5 months pregnant, exhausted, broke, waiting on test results that might shatter me, sitting in a bathrobe that smelled like Zatarain's and failure. I nodded. Because it sounded so reasonable. Because it came from the one person who showed up. The one person who brought food and money and warmth when everyone else brought silence or statistics or sticky notes. Because when you're drowning and someone throws you a rope, you don't check their hands for rope burns, you grab it. You hold on, you say thank you. I didn't know that she and Beau had been sleeping together since March of 2023. I didn't know that in July of that year, she'd opened a joint account at her own credit union, Bayou Federal, the one on Sherwood Forest Boulevard, where she was the assistant manager, with Beau Allen Fontenot's name right next to hers on the signature card. I didn't know that $189,400 of our money, mine and Beau's, marital assets earned and saved over 14 years, had been flowing into that account for 18 months in transfers so small and so regular that they looked like background noise on a bank statement nobody was reading. $3,000 here, $5,000 there. $11,000 in September, the week I told him I was pregnant. $11,000 moved the same week he found out about the baby. While I was sitting in Dr. Melancon's office, learning about chromosomal odds, he was wiring money to an account I didn't know existed with a woman I thought was my sister in everything but blood. I didn't know that the $350 she'd just handed me, the money in the envelope, the cash she'd said to pay back whenever or don't, was skimmed from a pool of $189,400 that was half mine. She'd given me back $350 of my own money and presented it like charity, like generosity, like love. I didn't know that the étouffée, every single Tupperware of it, every dark roux, every cayenne kick at the end, every bowl she'd brought to my door since September, was seasoned with something that doesn't have a name in any cookbook. The closest word I have is guilt, but that implies she felt some. I'm not sure she did. I didn't know that every back rub, every "you're so strong" chore, every ride to the doctor, every hour in the waiting room with that old People magazine, every tissue handed to me at exactly the right moment, all of it, every single gesture that I had cataloged in my heart as evidence that I was loved, was the most elaborate, patient, methodical betrayal I had ever been a part of. But that storage unit on Airline Highway, Unit 47, climate-controlled, $63 a month, it knew. It had known since July of 2023. And we're getting closer to it now. Okay, I need to stop here for a second. Not because the story stops. It doesn't. It gets worse before it gets better, and then it gets so much better that I still wake up some mornings and have to remind myself it actually happened. But I need to stop because I want to say something to you. To you specifically, whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever time it is where you're sitting right now. If you're still here, if you're still listening to this, if you haven't clicked away or scrolled past or gotten distracted by something easier, that means something to me. It really does. I know that sounds like something people say on the internet and don't mean. I mean it. Someone from Texas commented on my last story at 2 a.m. and said she almost didn't click on it, but she's glad she did. I read that comment at 6 a.m. with my coffee and I about lost it. So tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I see every single one of you. And I'm not just saying that. I read them, all of them. Even the ones at 3 a.m, especially those. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now would be a real good time, because this story is about to take a turn that I still have trouble believing, and you don't want to miss it. Hit that button. I'll wait. I won't actually wait because this is a recording, but spiritually, I'm waiting. So anyway, the phone call I need to tell you about now happened on a Tuesday in January. I'd already told you about the Thursday call from my mother in December, the one about burying and burned eggs and a mug that rolled under a table. This call was different. This call came from Dr. Melancon's office, and it changed everything. The phone rang on a Tuesday in January. I was sitting in my RAV4 in the Pelican State parking lot, eating a granola bar that tasted like compressed sawdust, held together by the memory of honey. I'd been eating these things every morning for 3 weeks because they were cheap, they fit in my purse, and they didn't require cooking, which had become a loaded activity ever since the scrambled egg incident in December. Dr. Melancon called herself. Not the receptionist, not the nurse. Elaine Melancon picked up the phone and dialed my number personally, and I appreciated that more than I can tell you, because the receptionist at that office had the emotional warmth of a toll booth operator on Interstate 10 during rush hour. "Mrs. Fontenot," she said, and I could hear something in her voice. Not pity, not concern, something lighter, something that had air in it. "Your results came back. Everything looks normal. You're carrying a healthy baby girl." Healthy, baby, girl. 3 words, 9 syllables. And every single one of them landed on me like sunlight breaking through a roof I didn't know had a hole in it. I dropped the granola bar. It fell into that gap between the seat and the center console, the black hole that exists in every car ever made. And it would live there for the next 4 months because I could never get my hand down there no matter what angle I tried. I lost a granola bar and gained a future in the same 3 seconds. I laughed, then I cried. Then I did both at the same time, which is a sound somewhere between a hiccup and a pelican honking at a fish it just spotted. A woman in a Chevy Equinox in the next spot looked over at me with the expression of someone watching a nature documentary about an animal she couldn't identify. I gave her a thumbs up. She did not return it. She locked her doors. 1 in 40. I'd been carrying that number in my chest for 3 weeks like a stone, like a tenant who'd moved in without a lease and refused to leave. And now it was gone. Not the chest, the stone. Though, honestly, the crying loosened something in there, too. Some knot I'd been tying tighter every night at 3 in the morning on the ceiling. The knot was gone. The ceiling could go back to being just a ceiling. I called my mother. Odette picked up on the first ring, which meant she'd been sitting next to the phone in her kitchen on Reese Street in Breaux Bridge, probably with a cup of her terrible coffee, pretending she wasn't waiting for this exact call. Odette Thibodeau would rather eat a raw onion than admit she'd been anxious. But mothers know, and daughters know, that mothers know. It's a whole unspoken surveillance network that runs on love and stubbornness. "Healthy," I said. "Girl." 5 seconds of silence. 5 seconds from a woman who once argued with a priest about the proper way to make a roux during a church fundraiser, who has never in 78 years met a silence she didn't fill with a comment or a correction. Then she said, "Eh bien. I suppose I need to find my mother's baptism dress. It's in the attic somewhere. Probably behind the Christmas ornaments, and that box of your pears fishing things I keep meaning to sort through." That was her way of saying she was in. Odette didn't say, "I'm sorry I doubted you." She announced a task. Because in Breaux Bridge, in our family, you don't announce your feelings. You announce what you're going to do. The feeling is underneath, holding it up like a foundation under a house. My mother cannot sew. She once tried to crochet a scarf for me in high school, and the result looked like a fishing net designed by someone who had only had fishing nets described to them verbally in a language they didn't fully speak. 3 feet wide at one end, 6 inches at the other. A stranger at the Walmart on Airline Highway asked me if I'd been in an accident. But she was going to find that baptism dress if she had to dig through 30 years of attic dust. That's love, Cajun style. No words, just action and dust and a dress that probably had moth holes. 2 weeks later, she drove up from Breaux Bridge for a sonogram appointment. An hour on Interstate 10, which she hated because the truck drivers scared her. She arrived in her good blouse, the cream-colored one she wore to church and to my pair's funeral and to my wedding. Her pearl earrings, the small ones that had been through every important door in her life. She sat in the chair next to the exam table with her hands folded in her lap like she was in the front pew at Street Bernard's. Upright, proper, like a woman who understood that this room was a kind of church, and what was about to happen was a kind of prayer. The technician put the wand on my stomach, and that heartbeat filled the room. That fast little whoosh, 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 like the smallest marching band in the world rehearsing inside me for a parade nobody had scheduled. My mother put her hand over her mouth. Her eyes filled up. The pearls caught the fluorescent light, and for 1 second she looked exactly like the photograph of her on her wedding day in 1969. She whispered that she was sorry for what she'd said about burying me, sorry for the phone call in December. I started to tell her it was okay, but she held up one hand, the way she used to do in her classroom when a 7th grader tried to answer before she'd finished the question. "I was scared, sure," she said. "When I'm scared, I say terrible things. Your pair used to tell me that. Every argument, he'd wait until I was done yelling and say, 'Odette, you're scared.'" Stop being mean about it." He was right. Then she squeezed my hand. Her hand was smaller than mine. When did that happen? When did my mother's hands get smaller than mine? "You're going to be a wonderful mommin, even at your ridiculous age." That's as close to a Hallmark card as Odette Thibodeau gets. I'll take it, I'll frame it, and hang it on every wall in whatever apartment or house or cardboard box I end up living in. Because my mother's love doesn't come in wrapping paper. It comes in baptism dresses with moth holes and the words "ridiculous age" delivered with tears running down a 78-year-old face. Something shifted after that, not in the divorce. That was still a train wreck in slow motion, but something shifted in me. The terror about the baby was gone. My mother was back, and I started thinking thoughts that felt like freedom but were actually the beginning of the biggest mistake I almost made. Here's the thing about surrender. Sometimes it looks like wisdom. Sometimes it looks like peace. Sometimes it looks like a woman sitting at her kitchen table with a calculator and a cup of decaf chicory, running numbers until the numbers start to make sense. And sometimes, if you're not careful, it looks like your best friend standing in your living room telling you to hand over everything you own while she's sleeping with your husband in a house she helped him pick out. But I didn't know that part yet. I just knew the numbers. Mortgage, $1,267 a month. Property taxes went up 12% last year because East Baton Rouge Parish apparently decided that every homeowner needed to personally fund the next phase of road construction on Segan Lane. The roof had a soft spot near the chimney that the inspector missed when we bought the place in 2013, and every time it rained hard, which in Louisiana is every third Tuesday, I'd put a mixing bowl under the spot in the hallway and listen to the drip like a metronome counting down the remaining lifespan of the house. The water heater groaned every morning at 6, like a man who didn't want to go to work. The fence, Terrence's masterpiece, needed repairs every spring because Beau used the wrong wood and was too proud to admit it. Let him have it. Let him have the truck and the base boat and the riding mower and the Lowe's card and the fence that leaned like it was trying to eavesdrop on the neighbors' conversations. Start clean. A small apartment somewhere. Me and the baby. Simple. I told Tamika over the phone. She practically threw a parade. I could hear her smiling through the receiver, which is not something I thought was possible until that moment. "Oh, sure, that's so brave," she said. "That's the right call. You're choosing yourself and the baby. The house is just walls and pipes and a roof that's going to need $10,000 worth of work by next summer anyway." I paused. "How do you know about the roof estimate?" "You told me at brunch last month, Chur. Remember? You said Beau got a quote from that guy on Florida Boulevard." I didn't remember telling her that. I didn't remember brunch last month. I didn't remember most of December, to be honest. December was a blur of Zatarains and chopped reruns and ceiling math and crying into a pillow that smelled like a man who didn't want me anymore. So I let it go. I let a lot of things go during that period. Roof estimates, suspicious details, questions that deserved answers, but didn't have the energy to ask them. I let go of the house. I let go of the equity. I let go of the idea that I deserved half of what we'd built over 14 years, because a woman I trusted told me that letting go was the same thing as being strong, and I was too tired to know the difference. At work, the week after I'd made peace with losing everything, Denise leaned over the partition between our cubicles. Denise was my cubicle neighbor at Pelican State. The kind of woman who noticed a coworker's new haircut, new shoes, and new emotional crisis before the coffee was cold. She had a radar for details that would have made her an excellent detective or an extremely dangerous gossip. She was both. She said she had a random question. She'd been at Perraine's Seafood on Perkins Road last Saturday with her sister. Crawfish season had just started and they'd gone for the lunch special. She asked if the woman at the table by the window was my friend Tamika. "Probably," I said. "She lives nearby." Denise said Tamika had been having lunch with some guy. Tall. Carhartt cap. She asked if Tamika was seeing someone. Said good for her. Life's too short. I nodded. I filed it away in the back of my brain, the section that stores information you don't think is important but keeps it anyway, like a junk drawer you never clean out. Because one day you might need that random Allen wrench or that battery you weren't sure was dead. One day, that useless detail might turn out to be the thing that saves your life. Tall, Carhartt cap, Perraine's Seafood, window seat. Beau wore a Carhartt cap everywhere. But lots of men in Baton Rouge wore Carhartt caps. It was Louisiana. Carhartt caps were practically a regional uniform. I didn't connect it. I wasn't ready to connect it. My brain filed it between probably nothing and don't think about it, right next to the roof estimate question and Tamika knowing things she shouldn't have known and all the other small, sharp pieces of a puzzle I wasn't assembling because I didn't know there was a puzzle. I went back to my spreadsheet. I processed a claim for water damage on a duplex in Zachary. The world kept spinning. The details kept piling up in the drawer. That same week, I was cleaning out Beau's side of the closet. He'd taken most of his things when he moved out in November, loaded up the Ram in 2 trips while I was at work, which was exactly the kind of cowardice I'd come to expect from a man who delivered a divorce via sticky note, but he'd left some things behind. A pair of dress shoes he never wore, a LSU hoodie with a bleach stain on the sleeve, and his old Carhartt jacket, the heavy canvas one, hanging in the back of the closet, still smelling like his cologne and diesel fuel and something else I couldn't name, something that smelled like the cab of a truck where 2 people had been sitting close together. I almost tossed it in the Goodwill bag without checking the pockets. I was 9 weeks from my due date. My back hurt. My ankles looked like they belonged to a different, much larger person. My patience for sorting through the artifacts of a dead marriage was approximately 0. I grabbed the jacket by the collar, held it over the bag, and something made me stop. Call it habit. Call it the same stubbornness that made me reorganize the junk drawer when the world fell apart. Call it the instinct of a woman who'd spent 9 years processing insurance claims, trained to check every pocket, every folder, every overlooked corner, because the detail that nobody thinks matters is always the one that does. I reached into the left pocket. Empty. I reached into the right pocket. My fingers found a piece of paper, folded in half, soft at the edges from being carried and forgotten. I pulled it out. A receipt. Climate-controlled storage unit. Airline Highway, Baton Rouge. Unit 47. $63 a month. Paid in cash. I stood in that closet holding that receipt the way you hold a match in a dark room. Carefully. Because you don't know yet whether what it's about to show you is a way out or a fire. Wednesday, March the 5th. I remember the date because I'd had a prenatal appointment that morning, and Dr. Melancon said the baby was measuring perfectly, and my blood pressure was impressive given your circumstances, which is doctor language for how are you still vertical right now. I was 8 months pregnant. My ankles looked like they belonged to someone else, someone larger, someone who had made different life choices. I could no longer see my own feet, which was probably for the best because my pedicure situation had become what the United Nations would classify as a humanitarian concern. I drove my RAV4 with the seat pushed back. So far, I was practically in the back seat, steering with my arms fully extended like a woman, trying to hug the dashboard from a distance. I drove to Airline Highway. The storage facility was one of those places you drive past 1,000 times and never really see. A long, low building with orange roll-up doors and a chain-link fence and a sign that said climate-controlled in letters that were missing the second L in controlled. It sat between a tire shop and a business that sold used restaurant equipment, which meant the whole block smelled like rubber and industrial degreaser and the faint memory of someone else's kitchen. I entered the code from the receipt at the gate. It worked. Which meant the code hadn't been changed, which meant Beau hadn't thought about this receipt in a long time, which meant he'd forgotten it was in that jacket, which meant he'd forgotten the jacket was in the closet, which meant he'd underestimated me. Every lock on every door I'd walked through that morning had been left open by a man who assumed I'd never come looking. Unit 47 was at the end of a concrete hallway lit by fluorescent tubes, 2 of which were flickering in that slow, dying rhythm that fluorescent lights adopt when they've given up on life but haven't been officially retired. The air smelled like concrete dust and moisture, and the particular staleness of a place where things are stored but never visited, like a room holding its breath. I turned the key. The lock clicked. The door rolled up with a sound like a metal throat clearing itself. Inside was mostly empty. A few cardboard boxes stacked against the back wall. A set of golf clubs I'd never seen before, which told me something, but I filed it away for later. And one box, a medium-sized cardboard box, the kind you get from a liquor store, sitting on a plastic shelving unit at waist height. No label, no tape, just the flaps folded over each other. I opened it. The first thing I pulled out was a stack of quarterly account statements. Bayou Federal Credit Union. The branch on Sherwood Forest Boulevard, the branch where Tamika Renee Boudreau was the assistant manager. The statements were addressed to this storage unit. Not to Magnolia Ridge Drive. Not to Tamika's house in Ladson. To a storage unit on Airline Highway that cost $63 a month and held one box and a set of golf clubs and enough paper to end 2 lives and save 1. 2 names on the account: Beau Allen Fontenot, Tamika Renee Boudreau. The balance as of December 31st, 2024, $189,400. I'm going to say that number again because my brain needed to hear it 3 times before it believed itself. $189,400. I sat down, not on purpose. My legs made a decision that the rest of my body hadn't approved. I ended up on the concrete floor, 8 months pregnant, sitting sideways with my back against the metal wall of the storage unit, holding a piece of paper that weighed less than an ounce but felt like it contained the entire weight of the last 6 months of my life. I went through the statements one by one, month by month. Transfers from an account number I recognized. Our joint checking at Coastal Commerce Bank. The account that had gone from $52,800 to $4,100. The money hadn't disappeared. It had been moved. Carefully, regularly, in amounts small enough to look like noise on a statement nobody was reading. $3,500 here, $6,200 there, $8,000 in November. And one transfer in September, the month I found out I was pregnant, for $11,000 even. $11,000. Moved the same week. I sat on an exam table in a paper gown and heard the word pregnant for the first time at 49. While I was Googling chromosomal odds at a red light on Segan Lane, while I was sitting in community coffee with my hand on my stomach, trying to feel a heartbeat that was too small to feel. He was moving $11,000 into an account with my best friend's name on it. The second thing in the box was a life insurance policy. $500,000. Beau Allen Fontenot, policyholder. The beneficiary line had been changed. The original beneficiary, the one typed in the clean font of the original policy, was Celeste Marie Fontenot, my name. Crossed out with a single line and replaced in handwriting I recognized as Beau's with Tamika Renee Boudreau. He'd changed who would get the money if he died. He'd replaced me with her on paper before he'd even handed me the divorce filing. The policy change was dated August of 2024, 1 month before I found out I was pregnant. The third thing was a purchase agreement, a house in Denham Springs, Louisiana, 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a 1/4-acre lot on a street called Cypress Hollow Lane. Purchase price $268,000. Down payment of $45,000. Paid from the Bayou Federal account. The buyers listed on the agreement were Beau Allen Fontenot and Tamika Renee Boudreau. Closing date, June the 1st, 2025. They were buying a house, together, with my money. While I was crying into a throw pillow on a couch that smelled like his cologne, they were house shopping. While Tamika was handing me $350 in an envelope and telling me to start fresh, she already knew exactly where she was starting. Cypress Hollow Lane, Denham Springs, 3 bedrooms. For her and Beau and probably Jalen and his football cleats making scuff marks on someone else's kitchen floor. I sat on that concrete floor for a long time. The fluorescent light above me flickered. The air smelled like dust and metal and the faint chemical sweetness of climate control working overtime. My daughter kicked. Hard. Like she was knocking on the inside of my stomach saying, "Hey, you still in there? Because I need you to be in there right now." I need to stop for a second. Because this next part, the part where I sat on a concrete floor in a storage unit on Airline Highway and watched my entire life rearrange itself, this is the part that still makes my hands shake when I think about it. Okay, I'm good. I sat on that concrete floor and I replayed everything. Every single moment from the last 6 months. And it was like watching a movie you've already seen, except this time someone turned on the subtitles and the movie is completely different. The dialogue is the same. The actors hit the same marks, but the words at the bottom of the screen tell you what's really being said, and once you read them, you can never watch it the old way again. Tamika driving me to the OBGYN in September. So kind, so thoughtful. 2 chicory coffees and a bag of beignets from Choctaw Drive, and not a single complaint in the waiting room. But Beau knew about that appointment. He knew the time, the doctor, the results, that same evening. I'd assumed he'd asked. He hadn't asked me anything in weeks, she told him. She sat in that waiting room reading about a celebrity divorce, and then she called him and reported everything. The appointment was surveillance. The beignets were a cover charge. Tamika helping me organize my financial documents. Sitting at my kitchen table with bank statements and tax returns spread out everywhere. The filing system from Office Depot. The blue pen. The neat little piles. So Reggie has everything he needs, she'd said. She wasn't helping me. She was running an audit. She was making sure there was no stray statement, no overlooked document, no breadcrumb trail that might lead me from Coastal Commerce Bank to Bayou Federal Credit Union. She checked every drawer in my house that day. I thought she was being thorough. She was being thorough, just not for my benefit. Tamika recommending Reggie Landry, Pleasant Reggie, Guppy Reggie, the man who wouldn't subpoena bank records because he didn't want to antagonize the judge. The man who missed a filing deadline in January that I didn't even know about until later. The man who charged me $4,500 to accomplish exactly nothing. She picked him because he wouldn't find anything, because he wasn't built to find anything. He was built to swim in circles in a dirty tank while the real fish swam free in open water somewhere he'd never look. Tamika saying, let him have the house, start fresh. Of course she wanted me to stop fighting. Of course she wanted me to surrender the house and the equity and everything else and walk away with my 401k and a sense of gratitude. Because if I stopped fighting, no one would dig into Beau's finances. No one would trace the transfers. No one would find the $189,400 at Bayou Federal, or the house on Cypress Hollow Lane, or the life insurance policy with her name where mine used to be. She could have Beau and the money and the new house with the quarter-acre lot, and I'd walk away with a baby in a bathrobe and a box of Zatarain's and the unshakable belief that my best friend had saved me. That was the plan. And it was working. The $350. She'd handed it to me in an envelope on my couch while I sat in a bathrobe that smelled like failure. Pay me back whenever. Or don't. $350 skimmed from a pool of $189,400. That was half mine. She gave me back a fraction of my own money, and I cried with gratitude. I thanked her. I said I didn't know what I'd do without her. She rubbed my back and said I was the strongest woman she knew, and the whole time she was doing the math in her head, calculating how much longer she needed to keep this up before the settlement was final and the door closed behind me forever. That nod, the one at my kitchen table when I told her I hadn't called the bank, the one in September when she'd asked about the finances and I'd said I hadn't checked. Quick, small, a period at the end of a sentence. I understood that nod now. It wasn't sympathy. It wasn't a friend processing your pain. It was relief. It was the nod of a woman confirming that the person she was stealing from still wasn't looking. And Denise at the cubicle partition, asking about Tamika at Perrine's Seafood with the tall man in the Carhartt cap. Beau wore a Carhartt cap to every restaurant. I knew that. I'd known that for 14 years. But I hadn't connected it because I wasn't ready to connect it, because the brain protects you from truths it thinks will kill you, and sometimes the brain is wrong about what's survivable. Here's the thing about betrayal. And I'm not talking about Beau. Beau's betrayal was a hurricane. You could see it forming offshore. You could track it on the radar. You could board up the windows and buy water and wait for it to hit, and when it hit, it was loud and destructive and obvious, and you knew exactly what had happened and who did it. Beau's betrayal had a name and a category and an eye you could see on satellite. But Tamika's betrayal was a termite, silent, invisible, working inside the walls of your house, eating the wood that holds everything up, and by the time you notice the floor is soft, the damage has been happening for years. You can survive a hurricane, you rebuild. But termites take the structure. They take the thing you thought was solid and they turn it to dust from the inside. And the worst part is, you were living in the house the whole time. You were sleeping in it. You were eating etouffee at the kitchen table while the walls were being hollowed out around you. I made it to my car. I don't remember walking there. I sat in the RAV4 in the parking lot of Rouse's Market on Airline Highway, the one near the storage facility, with the engine running and my hands on the steering wheel, going absolutely nowhere for 40 minutes. The statements were in my lap. The baby kicked again. Twice. Like she was saying, okay, you've seen it. Now, what are you going to do about it? I called my mother. Odette picked up on the second ring. I told her everything. The storage unit, the statements, the $189,400, the life insurance, The house in Denham Springs. Tamika. All of it. And I was crying. And I was 8 months pregnant in a Rouse's parking lot with my hands shaking and the statement sliding off my lap onto the floor mat every time I moved. I said, "I don't know what to do, Mommin. I had a plan and it's gone. Everything I thought I knew is gone, and I don't know what to do." She was quiet for 3 seconds. Then, my 78-year-old mother, a retired French teacher from Breaux Bridge who can't crochet a straight line and makes the worst coffee in the Atchafalaya Basin, said 7 words that put my spine back together like a chiropractor working with nothing but language. "Cher, you've got the receipts. Use them." I found Nadine Arsenault, the way you find anything important in Louisiana, through a church connection. Father Trosclair at St. Joseph's on Iroquois Street had known the Arsenault family for 30 years. When I sat in his office the day after the storage unit and told him in very general terms that I was in trouble and needed a lawyer who could fight, he didn't ask questions. He wrote a name and a phone number on the back of a church bulletin and slid it across the desk like a man passing a note in class. "God helps those who help themselves, Celeste," he said. His eyes were kind, but his voice had an edge to it, the edge of a man who'd heard enough confessions to know that mercy and justice aren't always the same thing. And he gave you a good lawyer. Use her. Nadine's office was on 3rd Street in downtown Baton Rouge, above a coffee shop that sold café au lait for $4, which I considered reasonable. Not like those places in Charleston or Austin where they put gold flakes in a latte and charge you $16 for the privilege of drinking something that looks like a craft project. $4. Café au lait. No gold. Just good coffee in a paper cup. I liked 3rd Street already. I climbed the stairs, which were narrow, and creaked in a way that suggested they had stories but weren't telling them, and I found a door with a brass nameplate that said Arsenault Family Law. Inside was a small waiting room with 2 chairs, a fern that was somehow thriving despite being in a room with no windows, and a framed degree from Louisiana State University School of Law. Next to the degree was a photograph of a woman standing outside a courthouse next to a sketch artist's rendering of a courtroom scene. The caption underneath said the case involved a real estate developer who'd hidden $1.8 million in a shell company. The woman in the photograph was smiling the way a carpenter smiles when she finishes a difficult joint. Precise, satisfied, not warm. Nadine herself was about 43. She wore her reading glasses on a chain around her neck, like a weapon she could deploy at any moment. She had dark hair pulled back, no jewelry except a thin gold chain, and the kind of posture that suggested she'd never once in her life slouched in a meeting. She shook my hand with the grip of a woman who meant business, and didn't consider small talk part of that business. I put the box on her desk, the same cardboard box from Unit 47, the quarterly statements, the life insurance policy, the purchase agreement for Cypress Hollow Lane. I put it all in front of her, and I sat down in a chair that was nicer than any chair in Reggie Landry's entire building, and I waited. Nadine put on her reading glasses. She opened the first statement. She didn't speak. She turned pages. She cross-referenced numbers. She looked at the life insurance policy for a long time, then set it aside and picked up the Denham Springs purchase agreement. She checked the dates. She checked the names. She checked the account numbers against the transfer records. 8 minutes, I counted. I've become a woman who counts silences. I blame Beau. I blame Reggie. I blame the 12 seconds at the kitchen counter and the 5 seconds on the phone with my mother, and every quiet moment in the last 6 months that turned out to be louder than any scream. When she looked up, she took off her glasses and set them on the desk and said 3 words. "This is sloppy." Sloppy, not "this is terrible" or "I'm so sorry." Sloppy, like a teacher grading a paper that showed effort but no skill. She was offended on a professional level before she was sympathetic on a personal one, and somehow that made me trust her more than anything Reggie had ever said in his squeaky chair next to his dying guppy. She explained, "Your husband and his associate opened a joint account at a federally insured credit union. They used a storage unit for correspondence, paid for with your joint credit card. Every statement, every tax document, every quarterly summary was mailed to Unit 47. The only reason I hadn't seen them before was because Tamika, as assistant manager at Bayou Federal, had the access to suppress certain mailings and redirect others. But the storage unit receipt, paid with our joint card, That was the loose thread. She couldn't control everything, Nadine said. She controlled the credit union side, but she couldn't control your husband's pockets. He paid for that unit with a marital credit card, left the receipt in a jacket in your marital closet, and forgot about it. That's not criminal genius. That's a man who thinks his wife doesn't check pockets. I asked about the evidence, whether opening a storage unit that wasn't technically in my name could cause problems. I'd been thinking about this since the parking lot at Rouse's. The phrase "not zero" had been living in my head like a new tenant, taking up the space that 1 in 40 had finally vacated. Nadine leaned back. He paid for that unit with your joint credit card. The receipt was in a jacket hanging in your marital closet. You found it while clearing out his belongings from your shared home. You had every legal right to be there, every legal right to that jacket, and every legal right to follow a financial trail that starts with marital funds. She paused. Could opposing counsel challenge it? They could try. Would they succeed? Not in my courtroom, not with this judge. She laid out the plan. In South Carolina, she started, then caught herself. Louisiana is a community property state. Everything acquired during the marriage is jointly owned. The $189,400 in that account came from your joint checking. Marital funds, moving them to a hidden account with a third party, is dissipation of marital assets. And your husband's attorney filed a financial disclosure with the court under penalty of perjury that lists his total assets at approximately $310,000. It does not mention Bayou Federal. It does not mention the $189,400. She let that settle. That's fraud on the court. In Louisiana, the judge can award the entire concealed amount to the other spouse, plus attorney's fees, plus costs. I told her what I wanted. I said, let him have the house, let him have the truck and the boat and the mower and the fence and the Lowe's card. Let him sign the settlement. Let him think he won. Let him shake Garrett Hebert's hand and smile. And then show the judge everything. Nadine stared at me for a long time. Then she looked at the box, then back at me, and something shifted behind her eyes. A lock clicking into a new position. He built himself a trap, she said. He's been sitting in it for 18 months. He just doesn't know the door is closed. I paid her $7,000 from a fireproof safe in my hall closet, cash I'd kept there since 2019 after reading an article about a woman whose husband drained all their accounts during a separation. $9,200 total. I'd been putting 20s and 50s in that safe for 5 years, like a squirrel hiding acorns for a winter it hoped would never come. Bo didn't know about it. Nobody did. Best kind of paranoid there is. For 6 weeks, I texted Tamika Renee Boudreau like nothing had changed. Smiley faces. Heart emojis. How's Jalen doing? You want to grab coffee this weekend, Chur? What would I do without you? Each message typed with steady thumbs and sent with a stomach that felt like I'd swallowed a battery. Each little heart emoji launched into the digital air like a flare from a sinking ship, except the ship wasn't sinking anymore. The ship had found a reef to stand on. The ship just needed the other boats to keep thinking it was going down. Nadine told me to keep everything normal. Don't change a single pattern. If Tamika senses something is off, she'll tell Bo. And if Bo knows you know, he'll move the money. He'll close the Bayou Federal account. He'll restructure the Denham Springs deal. He'll find a new hiding place, a smarter one this time, and we'll be chasing shadows instead of holding receipts. So I texted. I sent heart emojis to a woman who'd been sleeping with my husband for 2 years. I wrote, "Love you." Talk soon to a woman who'd handed me $350 of my own money and called it generosity. I typed, "You're the best." Chair to a woman who'd picked my lawyer specifically because he would fail, and then rubbed my back on a couch while I cried into a pillow that smelled like the cologne of the man she was going home to. Each text tasted like battery acid and chicory, but I sent them. Because the woman who ate Zatarain's rice mix out of a pot at 1 a.m. in a bathrobe was gone. In her place was someone who could wait, who could plan, who could smile at the person who had hollowed out her life from the inside and type "miss you," chair without her hands shaking. Well, her hands shook a little. I'm not a robot. I'm a 49-year-old pregnant woman with swollen ankles and a grudge. But I was a 49-year-old pregnant woman with swollen ankles, a grudge, and a lawyer who wore her reading glasses like a weapon. That's a different species entirely. During those 6 weeks, Nadine built the case the way a bricklayer builds a wall. One piece at a time. Precise. Level. No gaps. She subpoenaed the full transaction history from Coastal Commerce Bank. She traced every transfer from our joint checking to the Bayou Federal account. 18 months, 67 individual transfers. She made a timeline and cross-referenced every date with Beau's financial disclosure, the one he'd filed with the court under penalty of perjury. The results were devastating. And by devastating, I mean devastating for Beau. He'd listed his total assets at approximately $310,000. That number did not include the $189,400 at Bayou Federal. It did not include the $45,000 down payment on a house in Denham Springs. It did not mention the life insurance policy whose beneficiary had been changed from Celeste Marie Fontenot to Tamika Renee Boudreau in August of 2024. 1 month before I found out I was pregnant. Nadine showed me the timeline on a Tuesday afternoon in her office on 3rd Street. She'd printed it on a long piece of paper that folded out like an accordion, which felt appropriate for Louisiana. She pointed at a date in September. This one, she said. $11,000. Transferred the same week you told him about the pregnancy. She looked at me over those reading glasses. While you were sitting in Dr. Melancon's office learning you were carrying a healthy child, he was wiring $11,000 to an account with another woman's name on it. I already knew that. I'd read it in the storage unit. But hearing Nadine say it out loud, in her office, with the afternoon sun coming through the window and the sound of the coffee shop downstairs making someone's $4 café au lait, it hit different. Some things you have to hear twice before they stop feeling like fiction. The Denham Springs house had a closing deadline, June the 1st. The purchase agreement required Beau to complete the transaction by that date or forfeit the $45,000 deposit. Our court date was May the 15th. Nadine noticed this immediately. She calculated the gap. 17 days between the court date and the closing deadline. She made sure the court date stayed exactly where it was. She did not file any motions that might accelerate the timeline. She did not request a continuance. She let the calendar do the work. If we present the evidence on May 15th, she said, and the judge voids the settlement and freezes his assets, which she will, he won't be able to close on Denham Springs by June 1st. He loses the deposit. $45,000. Gone. She said, gone the way you say the word when you're describing something that deserved to be gone. With satisfaction. With precision. Like flicking a crumb off a clean table. The not zero worry didn't leave me during those 6 weeks. It moved in where the 1 in 40 used to live. Same room, different tenant. I'd be washing dishes and my brain would whisper it. Not zero. Lying in bed at night with the baby pressing on my bladder like she was using it as a pillow. Not zero. Picking out a car seat at Target, the one on Segan Lane, standing in the baby aisle surrounded by things I couldn't afford yet, holding a box with a picture of a smiling baby on it, and wondering if my daughter would ever sit in this seat in a world where her mother had won or lost. Not zero. But here's what I kept coming back to. He paid for that storage unit with our joint credit card. He left the receipt in a jacket in our closet. He used marital funds to hide marital assets. That's the kind of mistake you make when you think the person you're stealing from is too stupid to notice, or too broken to fight, or too pregnant to check a pocket. I was none of those things. Not anymore. The baby kicked one night while I was lying in bed, running the timeline in my head for the 100th time. Hard. A real kick. Not the gentle flutter she'd been doing for months. A full-on declaration of presence. I put my hand on my stomach and I said out loud, in the dark, in a bedroom that used to belong to 2 people and now belonged to 1.5. We're almost there, baby girl. 47 days. That's how long Beau Allen Fontenot had left to feel like a winner. He spent most of them washing his truck on Sundays and texting a woman who was about to lose her career at a federally insured credit union. And I spent them sending heart emojis and counting down the days until a courtroom on Main Street rearranged everything he thought he knew about winning. Thursday, May the 15th. East Baton Rouge Parish Family Court. The courtroom smelled like floor cleaner and old paper and someone's perfume that was trying way too hard, like a magnolia tree having an identity crisis in a government building. I was 9 months pregnant. Let me paint that picture for you. I walked into that courtroom in a maternity dress I'd bought at a consignment shop on Government Street for $18, and I looked like I was smuggling a watermelon under a floral print. The bailiff offered me a chair before I even asked. The court reporter offered me a pillow for my back. The judge, A woman in her 60s with reading glasses and the expression of someone who had seen every version of human foolishness and was no longer impressed by any of it, looked at me and then looked at Bo, and you could see her forming opinions in real time, the way weather forms on a radar screen, slowly and then all at once. Bo was sitting at his table with Garrett Hebert. He was wearing a sport coat I'd never seen before. Navy blue, 2 buttons, probably bought for the occasion at a department store where someone told him he looked sharp, and he believed them. He looked like a man at a job interview, not like a man at the end of a 14-year marriage. He looked confident, relaxed even. He'd gotten everything he wanted. The house with its $147,000 mortgage, and its leaking roof and its fence that leaned. The Ram, the base boat, the riding mower, the 60%, the Lowe's card. In exchange, I got my 401k and my freedom in a RAV4 that smelled like a coffee spill from 6 months ago. To him, this was a victory lap. The papers were on the table. I signed them. My hand was steady. Nadine stood behind me like a shadow with a law degree and reading glasses on a chain. I could feel her there the way you feel a wall behind you when you're standing at the edge of something. She didn't touch my shoulder. She didn't whisper anything. She just stood. Bo signed. He smiled at Garrett. Garrett smiled back. There was a handshake, a brief professional handshake between 2 men who believed this was finished. The judge had her pen ready. The court reporter's fingers hovered over her keys. And there was a moment, one brief, quiet moment, where everyone in that courtroom thought it was over. Then Nadine said, "Your Honor, before this agreement is finalized, we'd like to present newly discovered evidence of concealed marital assets." The room did that thing where all the sound gets sucked out at once. You know that feeling when you're on a plane and it drops 20 feet and your stomach hasn't caught up yet? That. But in a courtroom with fluorescent lighting and a woman in a floral maternity dress sitting perfectly still with her hands folded in her lap, Garrett Hebert turned to look at Nadine, then at Bo, then back at Nadine. And his face, I will carry this image with me for the rest of my life. His face went from polite confusion to pale recognition in about 2 seconds. He didn't know. Garrett Hebert genuinely did not know about the Bayou Federal account. His own client had lied to him, and he was finding out about it in open court at the exact moment it mattered most. That's the kind of surprise that ends professional relationships. And possibly licenses. Nadine presented the evidence the way she did everything. Calm, methodical. She didn't raise her voice once. She didn't need to. The numbers did the yelling. Twist number 1. She presented the Bayou Federal account statements. Joint account, Bo Allen Fontenot and Tamika Renee Boudreau. 18 months of transfers from our joint checking at Coastal Commerce. 67 individual transactions. Total balance, $189,400. She presented Bo's financial disclosure, the one filed under penalty of perjury, and showed the court that this amount had been deliberately omitted. Bo went white, not pale, white. Like someone had pulled a plug somewhere inside him and all the color drained out through his shoes. He leaned over to Garrett and whispered something. Garrett shook his head. Not the, "I'll handle this" head shake. The other kind. The kind that means we're in a place I cannot get us out of. Twist number 2. Nadine presented the life insurance policy. $500,000. Beneficiary changed from Celeste Marie Fontenot to Tamika Renee Boudreau in August of 2024. 1 month before the pregnancy. She let that date sit in the air for a moment. The judge removed her glasses and set them on the bench, which is the judicial equivalent of a person cracking their knuckles before a fight. Twist number 3. Nadine presented the purchase agreement for the house on Cypress Hollow Lane in Denham Springs. $45,000 deposit from the Bayou Federal account. Closing deadline, June the 1st, 17 days from today. She explained to the court that if the defendant's assets were frozen, which she was requesting, he would be unable to complete the purchase by the contractual deadline and would forfeit the deposit. $45,000 of marital funds, gone. Not because anyone took them, because Bo built a house of cards on a deadline and someone opened a window. Bo opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. He looked like that guppy in Reggie Landry's fish tank, swimming in circles with nowhere to go. Except this tank was a courtroom and the water was the truth, and there was no plastic plant to hide behind. The judge spoke. She asked Bo if he had disclosed the Bayou Federal account to his attorney. He didn't answer. She asked again. He said he could explain. She said she wasn't asking for an explanation. She was asking for a yes or no. He said no. The judge voided the agreement. She awarded me the full $189,400 as remedy for dissipation of marital assets. My 401k stayed mine. Beau got the house with its $147,000 mortgage, its leaking roof, and a fence that warps when it rains. He got the truck, and the base boat, and the riding mower, and the Lowe's card balance, and every single thing he'd fought for. And now it all felt like an anchor instead of a prize. The court referred the matter for potential contempt proceedings and flagged Tamika Renee Boudreau's involvement for professional review and potential federal investigation at Bayou Federal Credit Union. A senior employee who helped a client conceal marital assets using her institutional access at a federally insured financial institution. Her career in banking was over before she finished hearing about it. Beau didn't look at me, not once. He sat at that table and stared at a spot on the wall like it owed him money. Garrett Hebert was already packing his briefcase with the energy of a man who was about to have a very long conversation with his malpractice insurance carrier. I walked out of that courtroom with Nadine on one side and my mother on the other. Odette had driven up from Breaux Bridge at 6 a.m. She was wearing her pearl earrings, the small ones, the ones she wore to my pair's funeral and to my wedding, and now to the end of it. In the hallway outside the courtroom, my mother put her hand on my arm. Her fingers were cool and dry and lighter than I remembered. She was wearing the pearl earrings and her cream blouse, and a look on her face that I'd only seen once before, the day my pair talked a car dealer down from $8,000 to $5,200 on a used Pontiac in 1989. She'd stood behind him in that dealership with the same expression she was wearing now. Quiet pride, the kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that sits in the back of the room and nods once, slowly, when the work is done. That, she said, was the most satisfying thing I've watched since your pair made that man cry over a Pontiac, and I include your baptism and your wedding in that comparison. Don't tell Father Trosclair I said that. I laughed, a real laugh, the first one that came from somewhere below my chest in months. It surprised me the way a bird flying out of a bush surprises you. You didn't know it was in there. Nadine shook my hand in the parking lot. She didn't hug me. Nadine Arsenault was not a hugger. She was a handshaker. She shook my hand and she said, "You did well in there." And then she put on her reading glasses, which she didn't need in a parking lot, and walked to her car like a woman who had more traps to inspect. I watched her go, and I thought about Reggie Landry's guppy, still swimming in circles in a tank nobody would ever clean, and I felt a strange gratitude for that fish. If Reggie had been competent, I might never have found Nadine. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is the bridge to the best thing. You just can't see it while you're standing, on the worst thing, looking down. That night, I sat at my mother's kitchen table in Breaux Bridge while she made coffee. Decaf, because I was 9 months pregnant, and regular coffee was a memory from a past life, like sleeping on my stomach or seeing my own feet. She put a cup in front of me, her ancient ceramic mug, the one with the faded rooster on it, that had survived 3 kitchen renovations, a flood in 2016, and what my mother referred to as the incident with the pressure cooker in 2008, which she refused to discuss in detail, but which had apparently involved red beans and a ceiling. The rooster mug. It had a chip on the handle and the glaze was cracked in 3 places, and the rooster itself had faded to the point where it looked less like a rooster and more like a suggestion of a rooster, an impressionist painting of poultry. My pair drank from that mug every morning for 31 years. Community coffee with chicory, black, no sugar. He'd hold it with both hands like he was warming himself even in July, and he'd sit at this same table and read the newspaper and not say much. Because my pair was a man who believed that silence was a form of companionship and that the best thing you could do for someone you loved was be in the room with them without needing to fill it. The radio was playing low, something old, a Cajun waltz, accordion and fiddle, the kind of music that sounds like it's been playing in someone's kitchen since before electricity, the kind that doesn't ask you to dance so much, as it reminds you that dancing exists, and maybe you should try it sometime when your ankles aren't swollen and your life isn't a country song. My mother makes the worst coffee in the Atchafalaya Basin, weak, bitter, always slightly burned. She's been making it the same way since 1971, and no amount of feedback, suggestion, demonstration, or outright pleading has made any difference. I once bought her a French press for Christmas. She used it as a flower vase. I bought her a pour-over kit. She put pens in it. The woman is committed to bad coffee the way some people are committed to religion, with absolute faith and zero willingness to consider alternatives. That night, sitting at her table, 9 months pregnant, with $189,400 coming back to me and a daughter on the way, and a mother who couldn't make coffee but could put a spine back together with 7 words, that terrible coffee tasted like the best thing I'd ever had. I drank it slowly. I held the rooster mug with both hands the way my pair used to, and I understood why he did it. Not for the warmth, for the weight, for the feeling of something solid in your hands when the world has been liquid for too long. The baby kicked. Not hard this time, gently. A nudge. Like she was saying, "I'm here. You can stop fighting now. We made it." I put my hand on my stomach, and I just sat there. In my mother's kitchen, with bad coffee and a Cajun waltz and a woman who wore pearl earrings to a courtroom because she believed that some occasions require your best, even when your best has a chip on the handle and a faded rooster on the side. And for the first time in 8 months, everything was quiet. Not silent, quiet. There's a difference. Silence is the absence of sound. Quiet is the presence of peace. Silence is what happens when everyone leaves the room. Quiet is what happens when you stop waiting for the next bad thing and just sit. Just breathe. Just hold a warm mug and listen to an accordion playing something your grandmother danced to in a kitchen that smelled exactly like this one. I think sometimes God doesn't send you answers. He sends you people. He sends you a mother who can't knit, but can rebuild you with a sentence. He sends you a daughter who kicks when you need reminding that the future is real. And sometimes, when he's feeling particularly generous, he sends you a receipt in the pocket of an old jacket that changes everything, because God has a sense of timing that would make any lawyer jealous. I don't know what comes next. I know there's an apartment to find, and a crib to buy, and a daughter to raise, and a life to rebuild from the parts that are still good. I know the roof on Magnolia Ridge Drive still leaks, and the fence still leans, and the water heater still groans, and none of that is my problem anymore. I know that somewhere in Denham Springs, there's a house on Cypress Hollow Lane that nobody will be moving into on June the 1st. But I also know this. Sitting in that kitchen, holding that mug, listening to that waltz, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Not because everything worked out the way I planned. Nothing worked out the way I planned. But because the things that matter, the things that actually hold your life together when the walls are being eaten from the inside, those things were always there. They were just waiting for me to stop looking at the ceiling and start looking at the table, at the mug, at the hands holding it, at the woman sitting across from me who'd driven an hour in the dark to wear her good earrings in a courtroom and drink bad coffee with her daughter afterward. If this story reached something in you, if it touched a place you don't usually let people near, I want you to know that's not an accident. God puts stories in front of us for a reason. Sometimes they're warnings. Sometimes they're mirrors. And sometimes they're just a reminder that you're not the only one sitting at a kitchen table at midnight holding something warm trying to figure out what comes next. If you know someone who needs to hear this, share it with them. If you've been through something like this, tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this would be a real good time because the next story is already written and I promise you, it's worth staying for. See you in the next one. It's already on your screen.